The Lock-In is me, Brett Farrell, checking in with people I've come to know and admire as they share their stories from behind closed doors, so that we can hear what it's really like around the world. It's the eve of Mother's Day in the UK as I talk to Allan Jenkins. Allan is an author and the editor of the UK's Observer Food Monthly magazine. I'm Brett Farrell, and this is The Lock-In. Allan, hi, it's Brett.
Hi, Brett.
How are you?
I'm okay. Just got off a sort of very 45-minute wait for a maddening conversation with a broadband supplier.
Is that what life...
I will calm.
Well, I hope we can.
No, I had to hand the phone over to Henry, my wife, because I was...
All right, okay.
I'm done. How may I help you?
No, that's look on the bright side. At least with all that's going on in the world right now, at least the internet's still working away.
Yes, that was my point. My internet hasn't been working away, which is why I did wait 45 minutes for... And then when I found the bill, that seemed to me to be quite maddening. But anyway, I'm done with talking about broadband, I promise.
Okay. So what's the mood like there generally at the moment?
Well, it's a sort of strange mood in that it's been... We're sort of... It seems to me the US and the UK are sort of mirroring each other, that we both have populists with blonde hair who kind of bumble through when things are good, or most people can kind of get their brain around, or some people at least, enough people. But when there's crisis, they're like tragically exposed. So for weeks they were talking about herd immunity, and that they didn't need to do anything because we've got herd immunity, and anyway, only 2% of the population would die. It wasn't until someone from Imperial College pointed out what everyone else who'd done the basic math of, 80% of a population of 55 million, and then 1 to 2% of that we were on course for 250,000 deaths. And I think the point of that was that if, say, China had like 5,000 deaths, and we had 50 times the size of China, then basically we were kind of being run by inept near-war criminals, I think.
So is that right? So is that why we saw in the press out here that they changed their tune overnight?
They changed their tune because they weren't able, but you sort of watched them for days talking about herd immunity, and there had been no herd immunity to, I don't know, smallpox, for instance, or many of the other things that had plagued us before. Polio, there was no herd immunity to polio, to various things. So anyway, they have changed it. And also, but then if we looked at all the other countries, Germany, I mean, not Italy, of course, but Germany and, say, Denmark, I'm married to a Dane, so you looked at, they'd shut everything immediately. And it wasn't until last night that the Brits... So 2 days ago, they were saying, well, perhaps we could tell people not to go to the pub. And it's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen that film of Americans in Florida, where they're just packing every beach. And they're saying, well, And so as of yesterday, they finally did close restaurants. But the thing is, most restaurants have closed anyway, because their profit margins don't allow for... So if 50% of people were sensible and didn't go into restaurants, then restaurants were just folding, and there was no compensation. I guess the big change yesterday, which is probably 6 weeks late, is that finally there appears to be a package, but how retrospective it can be. And also the other thing is that a lot of the way that the economies run now is that a lot of people run on things called zero-hour contracts, which aren't fully employed. And it appears that people on zero-hour contracts get no protection. But as of last night, if you were on a PAYE tax, which is pay-as-you-earn tax, the government's offering to pay 80% up to £2,500 a month of those people's salaries. And the question is, they think 1 million people have gone in the hospitality industry in the last number of weeks. And now all restaurants have to close. Unless, one thing that is interesting is a number of them are trying various options. They've allowed restaurants to run takeaways. Before you had to have quite specific...
Yeah, we're seeing that out here as well.
Yeah, and also what a number of them are doing is because they have contracts with good suppliers, they're also turning into sort of like retail outlets. So if you go to, say, Brat, you can go there and you can buy meat from his supplier, and you can buy, good vegetables from their suppliers, and various products that they would normally be cooking into high quality food. But of course that applies to people like me, who are still in gainful employment.
But Alan, how does that work across the industry, though? Surely that can't be everyone adopting that model.
No, it can't be everyone, because most people can't afford to sort of keep open. It's the sort of forward-thinking people who have a clientele and who don't actually want their brand to die to some extent.
Right.
I think a number of people who close will likely never reopen.
So what has closed at the moment?
Sorry?
What has closed at the moment? It's the restaurants?
Everything closed as of yesterday.
Everything?
All restaurants, bars, nightclubs, theatres, gyms, anywhere basically that people gather have all been now shut down yesterday by the government. The problem is that you have people who own very large pub chains saying, well, it's anti-British to shut a pub. They didn't shut it in the war, without realising that, anyway. The English have a remarkable gift for sort of, lack of self-knowledge.
Yeah, we had a similar thing here at Bondi Beach. The local councils had to shut Bondi Beach, or at least limit the numbers to 500, after we had a freakishly warm summer day yesterday, and people came out in droves and packed the beach, which was probably not the best thing that could have happened.
Not forward-thinking, really.
But
I saw lots of interviews. In Florida, it's spring break, which are all the unis and all the young men who sort of go down to see girls in not very many clothing. Probably also, to some extent, the other way around. And the beach was packed as though it was Torremolinos in August. And you've got journalists in full-on, kind of germ warfare kit, speaking through masks, holding these microphones on very large sticks, saying, "What are you doing?" Next to a guy who's there in tiny Speedos, going, "Well, man, it's it's spring break."
It is a bit, but that's the amazing thing. You can't keep
What there is there's a percentage of the population which is extremely anxious. And there's an almost, I imagine, I don't know if it's equal, but also a very vocal percentage of the population which is not only not anxious, but there was an interview with someone who said, and someone was saying, well, look, if you don't get ill, you can make somebody else ill. He said, well, they shouldn't be here then. And it's there's a kind of, people almost think, and particularly younger people perhaps, think that they're impervious. Because I guess they've never had, exposure to things that threaten them.
No, nothing's really gone wrong.
Or they're just dumb.
Well, it could be a little of column A, a little from column B. But I was just thinking back to the Bondi. You can't keep the Australians out of the beaches, but are you able to keep the British out of the pubs, even in the circumstances?
Well, you can. I mean, that was the thing yesterday. What they will do is, I saw that one restaurant has had its license revoked, and so what you can do is rather than sort of have the army in it, which I think they've got the army in bits of France or one of the European countries, they put the army, maybe Italy, army on the streets as well as police. Then you've got the simplest way to do it is that all places that serve people food need a license, and then you just revoke the license. So therefore, it's no longer would make sense for them to have.
But what are people doing?
Open. But I don't think any pubs can now be open because they've been told to shut rather than asked to shut.
But what do people do now, Alan? They used to go to the pub after work just for camaraderie, to see.
I don't know. Do they? I'm not sure that people did so much. I guess they did in places, but I think that the problem is that again our self-idea of ourselves is basically from the 50s. I think that that was what sort of men went to the pub and women cooked at home. I don't think those days exist. Women and men both work, and that somebody cooks at some point, and they have children. People who have kids, and majority of people over a certain age, I guess 30, have kids, then it's not really helpful for the man to be at the pub all night.
And what are you hearing?
Sort of come home. That sort of Neanderthal thing. It actually, I guess it might exist sometimes in Australia. Excuse me, but it doesn't exist so much anymore.
It's not as much anymore. But where are people going for community at the moment? What are they doing? Just staying online? What's happening there?
Well, you can't really. The thing is, anything that's communal, you're supposed to observe this distance, and I think it's difficult to say. It's almost that if you ask me like in a week's time, you'll be able to see how it. I was on a bus yesterday, and buses are packed, and also there's pictures on the tube. Tubes are like football matches that you see from the 1930s. They're completely round because the government shut 40 tube stations, and that means there's conversely more people on the existing stations.
Goodness.
So at some point that will settle.
And what impact are you seeing from the people you know, the restaurateurs, the publicans, the cafe owners? What impact is it having on them at the moment? How are they feeling? What's their health like?
Well, I think they're feeling hopeless, truthfully. It depends, because it's about the responsibility of people who work for you. It actually depends on on the humanity of the employer, doesn't it? I saw yesterday that one hotel chain literally just sacked everybody with immediate effect, and so that various cooks and everybody who was in the hotel, because the hotel chains were no longer profitable and you couldn't go there, and they just sacked them. And I think it depends on the employer. You've got people like, say, Gary Usher, who runs Elite Bistro Group, very small group in bits of the north, desperately trying to hold on to staff and desperately trying to sort of keep those staff so they're not starving.
Yeah.
Again, the government announcements last night will make a difference, and I guess we'll see through next week how that happened. But almost every restaurant you can imagine was already closing because it felt that if you've been asked to close, you almost had to close, and it was only the stubborn last few that were staying open. So there isn't anywhere. I think people will sort of, like the English, they'll sort of see each other if they go for walks or something. I mean, gyms have gone, but there were interviews with people in gyms, packed gyms, and they were saying, but I don't take any. People in pubs were saying, but I'm a rebel. And you think, yes, but most of those people, I think, won't necessarily think of their impact on other people.
Yeah. What do you think is going to...
Because combined...
Sorry, go on, Alan, go on.
Well, the other thing we did is we had a sort of perverse idea to almost test less than anybody else you know. So if you're unwell and you call to get a test, it's near impossible to get a test. They just tell you to stay in. So there's lots of people self-isolating. On the magazine that's by me, 3 people have already self-isolated. And you imagine that will grow. I think journalists who are sort of exempt will go in. Most of the things that I sort of put together for the next magazine is like, they're just almost every 2 days you put something together and you think, well, that'll work, and then it's circumstances make it impossible.
But how are you trying to cover this? But you can't be sort of celebrating chefs and good restaurants in your magazine. So how do you cover this?
No. Well, what I think you can do is you can be supportive, where you can, but also to some extent what you do is you offer. The one thing that people are stuck inside, they'll eat, and one thing that they can do that is you can. I think to some extent you'll offer mainly recipes, you'll offer stories, you'll offer relationships, but yes, we had a piece that was about couples that work together, husband and wife, people working, what it was like to work 18 hours a day next to somebody in a small, high-pressured environment. Of course, we can't run that piece. I'm not sure we can ask chefs to come into studios and be photographed and wear makeup juggling cucumbers. I think that's probably gone. We have another thing where we have each month lunch with, which is quite a sort of a nice format of dealing with someone that you may have heard of, and you sit and talk to them over a meal that they choose. that you can't do. And it may be that we can find a different format for that conversation, but we probably can't.
But what do you see coming next once this is all over, once this washes through? What do you see the restaurant and food industry looking like?
Well, I think it depends, truthfully, on how long it takes. And at the moment, it depends on who you listen to. The Prime Minister a couple of days ago was saying 12 weeks. But as soon as anyone makes a pronouncement, who's a politician, populist politician particularly, what happens is that the scientists say, well, actually, we believe that social exclusion will last at least a year to 18 months. And I think if that's the case, then it's a very different scenario to if it's all kind of mostly over and they relax everything by June and restaurants can reopen. But if they can't reopen for 18 months, then I think it's carnage, because a lot of those people will have lost everything. And there'll have been people, lots of chefs aren't necessarily people who come from, privileged backgrounds, that they've worked for 18, 20 years to get to the place that they want to be, before they can open a place of their own, unless they've got money behind them, and it's gone. And I think the psychological impact of that is going to be enormous, to sort of suddenly go back to cooking 18 hours a day to feed people and make them feel happy. I think there are things where you've got local good restaurants that are in reasonable shape that are feeding the elderly people who live in that area. You've got quite a lot of what I would sort of call the Jose Andre kind of activist chef that are doing things. I noticed that...
Sorry, Allan, just...
Red Zeppi's... Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on this. You just said something really fascinating to me. You talked about the impact it's going to have on the chefs. But what is that impact likely going to be on mental health? What are you seeing now with...
I think it will be a massive mental health thing. I think it'll depend on who those people are. This is a community that, truthfully, we've run a number of stories about high levels of addiction in the hospitality industry. There's high levels of alcoholism. There's also high levels of cocaine. You have people working 18-hour days, 16, 18-hour days on their feet. They've been historically quite male environments. And that's being addressed. There's been more women in the kitchen. We've moved away from Gordon Ramsay screaming to a different idea of a recognition of kindness, to put another word, or at least good manners. But I think that there are people who will need I think if you just literally look at social media, we're living in an extraordinary age of anxiety, and I think that will take a toll. I think there are people who might physically recover, but it will take them an extremely long time before they are whole again in the way that they were. They may not be whole again. They may not want to be involved in cooking. And I think if you isolate people, the other thing is at this moment, we're only at the very, very beginnings of this. We don't know the long-term impact of basically... My daughter lives 4 doors from me, and she's isolating.
What?
And
wow.
My daughter is self-isolating at the moment, and she lives 4 doors from me. And I can wave at her from our window, but I can't go and see her. I can leave things at her door that she can pick up. But it's
how does that make you feel?
Close.
How do you feel as a parent about that?
Well, I feel helpless. But I'm not alone in feeling helpless. I'm in a better position than many people to cope with this. I have history of dealing with crises in my life. I come from a sort of slightly difficult background, and so I have strong survival things. But the idea of your daughter being threatened and vulnerable, and you being close by and unable to deal with it. And also one of the things, the reason we live close, the reason that she took the place a few doors from me is because we see a lot of each other. We have open house on Friday evenings where everybody comes around. And last night, for the first time, we didn't have anyone round. And I think that it's yet to play out how this will be. Ask me in 3 months' time. Ask me in 6 months' time. Christ, if we're there, ask me in a year, because I don't think... The scientists say a year to 18 months. Politicians can't do it. So it's like Trump saying, we'll be out of this in next week, or talking rubbish. But the trouble is no one believes, only the true believers believe. And then I guess people hold on to authority and faith.
Yeah.
I don't know where we are. I don't think we genuinely know. But we know 1 million people have lost their jobs in the hospitality industry. Or that seems to be the figure that we think. That seems to be fairly accurate. And that was before places had been told to shut. So the question is how much of this government package will do it. But there will be people who do just close it rather than pay the 20%. Also because a lot of margins in restaurants are very tight. They've been rent reviewed because, Chinatown will likely disappear. There's been a Chinatown in England since it was in Limehouse in the East End. It will likely disappear because they operate on such tiny margins, and they've been squeezed by local authorities who've been squeezed by governments, so they've increased business rates, and rental has gone up. And there's only, the increase in restaurants, they were already on the edge. They were staring into an abyss when they are rent reviewed by very large companies every 2 or 3 years. Yeah,
well, maybe it's the landlords who might have to take some of the hits here as well.
I think the landlords will be protected. It's often, as we know, the vulnerable who take the hit.
Yeah. Allan, one thing...
So we don't know. I'm going to a farmer's market today. I don't quite know how the farmer's market will operate. Will we be no one queuing? At the moment, everyone queues for brown shrimp in my farmer's market, or everyone queues for free-range chicken. And you queue. It's very much a middle-class environment. It's on the edge of Hampstead Heath. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but also I don't know how those businesses will work. You imagine most of the people who supply restaurants will also be in terrible trouble because if they're going to rely on supermarkets, the supermarket margins, the reason they supply restaurants is because they can make at least a living out of it. If they rely on large suppliers and only large distributors are left, then they're also in trouble.
Allan, one thing
that is interesting was that the government were because of Brexit, they were going to make it almost impossible for anyone to come into the country who was learning less than 25 grand and they were low skilled. One of the heartening things about this is pretty much we're now utterly reliant on a lot of very low, in inverted commas, low skilled people who work looking after our parents, no one can see. It's Mother's Day tomorrow. You can't see your mother. We go and my mother-in-law is 95. We booked we have a place on the Danish coast 3 kilometers from her, and we would go and see her. We can't go and see her because you cannot take the risk that you could
harm her or spread it.
That you could harm her because she at 95 you won't recover. And it's an odd thing. So the people who are caring for all the people that we love are the people that up until 2 weeks ago the government sort of despised. It is the carers and the nursing assistants and the auxiliary assistants, and they are mostly people who have come into this country and they work in areas that we have, as a country or certainly as a government, have looked down on, and we've never been more reliant. But truthfully, also, I think, never been more grateful. And I think that is interesting. I think how this pans out in the way that we see people, in the way that we value people other than for the wages they do, but instead for the service that they offer, I think is a really interesting thing, and I have real hope for that.
Allan, one thing that is certainly still true, and long may it continue, is that two things. The sun still rises in the morning, and you're there to take a photograph of it. So how are you for hope?
And seeds grow.
And seeds grow.
At least it's spring, and while I'm able, I can steal over Hampstead Heath as long as I don't sort of walk with anywhere near. And I can, yes, I planted potatoes the other day, which is the most fundamental food stuff, the most fundamental gardening thing you can do. You unearth magic. But the truth is, most people aren't able to do that, of course, because there isn't land.
Yeah.
So yes, for me, it's a balm, and I find there's home in homegrown and nurture in nature. But it's for most people, they don't have that. But yes, the sun is oblivious to us, as is the season. But then also we thought that about the sea, and then we find out that every living creature in the sea is dying because of our stupidity.
You've got to wonder whether
Australia has some of its own issues with.
Well, yes, but you've also got to wonder whether this is Mother Nature just saying, "Hey, everyone, just stop, just stop."
I don't know, because it seems to me we are less prone to cholera. 100 years ago, someone like me I was born in the underclass, I would very likely have not survived. It was only the fact that there was a health system and there was an NHS. People died because they couldn't afford medicine.
Yeah.
The average age of the people died because they were drinking crappy water in London, which was at that time the richest city the world had ever known, in the richest country the world had ever known, that controlled whatever it was, 40 to 50% of the world. The people who worked it were children working in mills, and we shut Ireland, and the country next to us, we made them grow potatoes, and then they starved to death because we wouldn't help them.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that
I hope we find a new.
I'm not sure
humanity.
it is God visiting us, because no one dies of smallpox. No one dies of. I had TB as a child. I would have died of TB 100 years ago.
Yeah. Allan, do you think we could catch up in a few months and just see how things...
Anytime. I miss the days that you and I would sit and eat a burrito by the canal. Brett, I'm there. I'm there for you. Call anytime.
It's going to be a while before we can do that.
I wish everyone in Australia well.
I think we're catching up to you.
I have good friends in Australia. I wonder about what will happen to their businesses. I don't know yet.
Well, so far our restaurants and cafes are still open, but subject to certain restrictions on how many people and density of people. But hey, things change fast in 24 hours.
That's the thing. I plan an issue every 3 days at the moment.
Oh, dear.
Every time I think, okay, that's it, we filled it, something catastrophic happens. And it suddenly just seems bad manners to be doing some of it, and it seems inappropriate. All it seems to me is that if we have any voices and we have connections with chefs, and at this moment they're in incredible difficulty, and we are, where we can, a friend with a voice to offer support. And that's what we can hope to be.
That's about the best you can do, and that's a very powerful thing.
That's about it.
Well, Allan, I'll let you get back to your day. I'm sure you've got it's Saturday morning there. I'm just so moved by some of those things you've shared.
Okay. Brett, take care of yourself.
You too, man. You too. That was Allan Jenkins. I'm Brett Farrell, and this is The Lock-In.